Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is artist, activist, and ambassador Sarain Fox. Sarain is Anishinaabe from Batchewana First Nation, just outside of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. She is no stranger to viewers of APTN. Sarain recently released her directorial debut, Inendi. Sarain, thanks so much for being with us, and congrats on the birth of your baby.
Auntie, thanks so much for having me, and thank you so much.
Congrats as well on your directorial debut, the documentary Inendi, She is Absent or She is Gone in Anishinaabe. This is a documentary about your Auntie Mary, a residential school survivor, the oldest matriarch in your family. Why was this an important story for you to make?
Yeah, so this story was incredibly important for me. My Auntie Mary is the oldest surviving matriarch in my family, and she holds the history single-handedly, really, of so much of my family's past. And I think it was important for me to hear her stories from her, but also think about legacy and what does it mean to hold on to those stories and to really pay attention and listen. And my Auntie Mary had actually been teasing me, saying that it was about time that I made something about her. So she was a huge advocate in getting her story out there as well.
Well, and we're glad she made you do it. You made this doc during the pandemic. How difficult was that to accomplish, and why did you want to make sure that it was done now and not hold off until the pandemic was over or had subsided some?
Yeah, so I think with the pandemic, there was this immediate sense of urgency that our elders were once again at risk. And so for me as an Indigenous person, our elders have been at risk for quite a while, and we see that just in how much they hold when they go, the stories, the songs, the teachings. And I think there was this universality that happened during COVID where collectively as a nation, we all started to think about our elders. And I think that was a really important moment. And I think as a director, to even consider filming during a pandemic was also it was a hard decision, because I know that the impact that traveling and bringing sickness into communities can have. So it was an incredibly huge decision to film right now. But I think it was necessary, because I think that, especially as a new mom, there isn't going to be anyone else who's going to pick up this work. I think each and every one of us has to be responsible for it and carry on our legacies.
I had the chance to watch the doc yesterday. Really enjoyed it. It does not seem like your directorial debut, and I'm sure that's because you've been in front of the camera for so many years. But, you know, having done all that work in TV before, was this, did the pandemic really change the way that this was done compared to some of your other shows you've done?
Oh, absolutely. Shooting during the pandemic set an entire new precedent in terms of the way that I think will work for a while. But I had to camp out on the front lawn of my auntie's house, and I think just that alone was so challenging and confronting. This is the house that I grew up going to, that I've always been welcome in, that I had to keep my auntie safe. So we camped on the lawn, and we had to keep our crew really tight. But I think storytelling and documenting is such an intimate space, and it was so hard to keep that distance while filming, and everything required more consideration. And as an Indigenous storyteller, it already takes so much more consideration to go into our communities, to do that in a proper way and to follow protocols. So we had to get tested every week. We worked really closely with Chief and Council to make sure that we were just operating in the most ethical and responsible way. But this was not what I imagined my first film to be like, and it was so much to consider and so terrifying to step on the other side of the camera. The pandemic just made it even that much more exciting and terrifying.
It is a real family affair, not just you and your Auntie Mary, but your partner, your mother. Did you have any hesitation about including your family and being so open with all of this?
Absolutely. Like you mentioned, I've spent many years now working, documenting, and amplifying Indigenous stories, and um, I'm really used to being vulnerable on camera. I share so much of my life with the world via socials, and uh, it's an incredible risk to take to ask your family to do the same, and to ask, the elders in your family uh, to bear it all, and then to have the incredible responsibility of editing that, and um, you know, and changing and shaping that narrative. I think it was really, really difficult, especially for my mom. When we were editing the first time I showed it to her, she said, "Why don't you just take me? Like, you don't need to have any parts with me." And I was like, "Mom, the whole point of having you up there is absolutely to have you in the documentary." So
Hmm.
I was just really happy that my family was so brave, and really trusted me and my team to tell their stories.
Your auntie, who also worked on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission documenting other survivors' stories, she kind of disappears at one point when you're supposed to be filming, and you talk about the struggle that you're having that I can assure you, reporters have too when speaking with survivors about slowing down or, struggling with your role, I guess, as someone helping her tell her story. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. It's an incredible responsibility when somebody lets you into their space, but also lets you into their world, and shares with you some of you know, the most horrendous things that have happened to them, but also just all the in between, the joy, and the way that they've been able to overcome. But my auntie is a force to be reckoned with. She does not listen to anyone. She follows her own path, and I think what I realized is she needed to tell her story in these like little perfect spurts, and then she needed to be able to get in her van and go for a ride and feel her independence. And so when we were filming, my crew just got really used to following her lead, and I think that's Indigenous way of tea. You just got to roll with it.
And she does tell her truths about basically, being kidnapped almost and separated from her brother when arriving at the school, the mental and physical abuse. Reading some of the other press that's been done around the documentary with you, it seemed like even the reporters were kind of not only shocked by this, but surprised. Are you hoping that this documentary does reach a non-Indigenous audience as well so that they too can hear these stories?
Absolutely. I think that um, it's a hard it's a hard road to walk when you're making content like this, because I'm not trying to re-traumatize Indigenous audiences by having these really hard traumas be heard over and over again. But for Indigenous people, I know that we already know these stories. We're hearing
Mm-hmm.
them all the time, so we take them in a different way. For non-Indigenous audiences, I think they need to hear the brutal honesty, and the truth of the policies that were in place in this country that were designed to eliminate Indigenous people. They need to be heard from survivors themselves, in their most honest and pure way. And I think that my auntie did a really good job in just speaking her truth, and I hope Canadians hear it. And I hope they hear it not just from my auntie, but from survivors everywhere, from every corner of this nation.
Absolutely. Sarain, much more to talk about the documentary and everything else you're involved in. We're just going to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Sarain Fox. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is artist and activist Sarain Fox, who's just released her first directorial debut of a documentary about her auntie, Inendi. And Sarain, as we mentioned, this was filmed as we're in the clutches of this pandemic, and there is a real fear that we hear a lot about, that we're losing elders to this virus, and what will be lost with them. In the doc, you say that this wasn't just about documenting for you, it was about remembering. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So one of the things that I think is so important is remembering while they're still here, while our elders are still here. So there's this sense of urgency to record our stories, to learn our songs. And I think that with technology, sometimes we can even rely on documenting them instead of listening to remember. And so I grew up in traditional lodges where you don't have the luxury of writing things down or documenting them. And so really listening to hear, I think, is so important. And now we have this added luxury of having all of this incredible tools to also preserve, which I think young people are really using to their advantage, whether it's TikTok or social media or like me doing this documentary. So I think it's vital to remember and to listen to remember and then go and capture the stories as well.
I'd like to talk about an opinion piece you wrote that was published just before Christmas, and it talks about a word that we hear a lot of, resilience. And you talk about or wrote about how you've started to hate the word resilience. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so in the same way that I really hate talking about reconciliation, I think it's way too soon. I think we're still needing to talk about truth. I think resilience also gets used in this way where Indigenous trauma, we get sort of gold stars for all of the trauma we've been able to overcome. And I think that we actually need to move beyond that. Indigenous people are incredibly resilient, but we're way more than that. We are overcoming, we are innovating, and I think that resilience makes it seem like we just need to survive. And I want to see Indigenous communities thriving. And I want us to emerge from these like common 4 words that are describing Indigenous communities all the time, like truth and reconciliation and resilience and trauma. I want to talk about our humanity and all of the incredible contributions we're making as well.
Yeah, it's hard not to make a face when you hear the word reconciliation now. Viewers from APTN would recognize you from shows like Rise, Future History. You're a spokesperson, a dancer, an actor, so many things. But in that opinion piece, you were talking about how your career was accelerating at an unhealthy pace. Did it take this pandemic for you to recognize that?
Yeah, I think that this pandemic surely helped me slow down and to take a step back and realize like what's important. Even taking the time to make my first documentary, to focus on my own family stories, to create new life. And I think that for many Indigenous people in my position who create a platform and become sort of lifted up to speak for Indigenous people, you have to be so careful because I can only speak for myself and my own point of view. And I think it's also so important to not become like the only Indigenous voice, but to always be looking to provide space for other voices to use your platform and to lift those up. So I think that it was also important for me to see and be able to provide space for other Indigenous young people to have a voice as well, and my auntie, our elders, to have a voice.
We had Jennifer Podemski on the show earlier this season, who's the producer, of a Future History of this doc, and she spoke about the struggle that you're speaking about, that can come with success and being called upon to be a mentor or a motivational speaker. Is that something that you've struggled with?
Yeah, I mean, I was incredibly bullied when I was growing up, and just to be a proud Indigenous woman took a lot of work as a young person, and I think it's valuable to share that story, but I'm also so aware that I want to be honest. I want young people to see a true reflection of indigeneity when they see me in my work, and it comes with an incredible amount of pressure. But I think that's work that I actually really take seriously, that I do want to do. Everything I do is for young people. And Jennifer Podemski was my role model. She hired me for one of my first jobs. So without being able to look up to people like her and my sisters and the women who are around me, I wouldn't have been able to imagine myself in the world that I'm in right now, in the industry that I'm working in. So I think it's incredibly important, but it does come with a lot of pressure.
Like you say,
responsibility.
For sure. It is critical to have those Indigenous voices out there, especially women. And you're in commercials for Sephora that, we wouldn't, I don't know when we would have seen an Indigenous woman in these types of things in the past. You're kind of speaking about it, but how important do you see that role for you and being a role model for other Indigenous women out there?
Yeah, so it's an incredibly humbling experience. I think when I was growing up, I didn't see Indigenous people at all on billboards or in mainstream commercials. And I think you need to be able to dream yourself into the world. And so I think I take that work really seriously, and I'm incredibly humbled by it. And the little girl in me is always just like, really? How did I get into this room? Who let me in here? Am I supposed to be here?
I guess, now that you're getting some time to yourself, or do you get a chance to reflect on that more now that you've done some pretty incredible things that, you're not moving on to the next project right away? You get a time to think about it?
A little bit, but I'm always plotting my next project. So right now, I'm sort of lost in the world of being a new mom. My daughter's 2 weeks old today. And I think for me, I just want to continue to do work that inspires her one day and that creates a better world for her to live in. And there's so much work to be done in terms of reframing the narrative and stories to be told. So no, I'm actually just excited to take this time, but also to think about what's next.
It is a super important time and super amazing. Happy 2-week birthday as well. One of the other things that Jennifer spoke about was the difficulties and barriers that she encountered as an Indigenous woman in the entertainment industry. Are those things that you've had to face as well?
Absolutely, and I think I'm so grateful that there have been people who have walked ahead of me that have been trailblazers like Ken. But I think just being able to be considered Sarain in a space, just Sarain Fox is interesting because I'm always the Indigenous storyteller, the Indigenous dancer, the Indigenous activist, and I think that used to be harder on me. Now I just proud and just want to continue to be that person in rooms where, like I said, I didn't think I ever belonged, and now I'm just starting to claim space in that way. But yeah, there's always going to be barriers to overcome, and I think we just have to continue to claim our space and lift up our stories shamelessly and take that space where we deserve it.
Well, and we don't want you to be any more than just Sarain, but do you feel that the voices of female Indigenous filmmakers are beginning to be heard now?
I think so. I really think that we are in a movement where there are so many Indigenous storytellers using so many different platforms to really be innovative and to do that work no matter where they are, using the tools that they have. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm excited that, you can use your phone now. Activists on the front lines can document things right as they happen. And so I think we're going to see the next 10 years be really, really exciting, and storytelling and Indigenous storytelling in ways that we couldn't even imagine. But I'm really proud to be a part of a budding community, and also a community that is finally uplifting people like Alanis Dababsawin in the mainstream. And there's so many storytellers who have just done so much prolific work, and I think the world should know about them. And it feels like more of the non-Indigenous community is getting to know about them now as well.
No kidding. Alanis is always worth dropping her name. You also worked on an award-winning show called Rise with Michelle Lartimer as the director. Given what we've just been speaking about, what are your thoughts on the controversy over her claims to Indigenous identity?
Yeah, so I think that Indigenous identity is such a loaded topic, and I think that right now I want to focus on the incredible work that's being done by Indigenous storytellers. And I think in particular with Rise, Rise had the opportunity to share stories across the US and Canada that I think would not have otherwise been told in that way. And I personally think it sparked a whole movement of sort of the resurfacing and the resurgence of documentaries being cool. And I'm proud of the work that was done there. I think it's so important for us to be connected to our communities and to always be taking the responsibility of being an Indigenous storyteller with just that responsibility. And so I feel an inherent responsibility to each and every person who has ever trusted me to uphold their stories. And I hope that in the future we continue to make sure that we are always holding on to those stories and telling them in a way that honors our truth. So I'm most interested in truth and the uplifting of truth. And I think that I just want to be a part of the positive community of change and of growth that is happening right now as a result of anything that is happening in the media that talks about Indigenous people and our identity. I want to talk about the positive, and I want to focus on those who are continuing to do the good work. Yeah.
Well put, Sarain. More to talk about here. We do just have to step aside for another quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Sarain Fox. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is artist and activist Sarain Fox. Sarain, we know this pandemic has had a huge impact on the arts, although you still managed to put together a documentary during it. But has your work been affected pretty greatly by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my work has been affected. It's also evolved, and the kind of work that I imagine now is changing. So I used to speak in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people, and that was one of the ways that I really felt like I got to connect with communities and being able to travel to, the most remote places and represent who I am and speak to young people on the ground. I think that has definitely changed and stopped. But I can now connect with classrooms via Zoom, and there's so much more happening that allows me to connect in different ways. I feel like I've lost work, it's been affected, but it's coming back in new ways, and I'm excited about what that looks like.
I wish we had booked you for an hour, because I could have talked about the places that you've gone and visited for half a show at least as well. We've mentioned your hectic schedule and slowing down. You've just welcomed a baby into the world. But you're out here promoting the documentary, and you've been doing that for a couple of weeks. So what's coming next, or will you actually be slowing down some?
Absolutely. I think I am going to slow down. I'm going to take the winter like a hibernation and hopefully reemerge with the spring buds. But I am looking to do more work with my auntie while she's still here. She's interested in writing a children's book for my firstborn. But also I'm looking forward to connecting more with the community in these new ways. But yeah, I am going to be slowing down, but I'm always excited for my next project.
Well, and we're absolutely excited too, especially if you and Auntie Mary put together a children's book. That'd be just great. Sarain, thanks so much for being with us and for all that you do. Appreciate it.
Chimigwich, thank you so much for having me.
That is all the time we have for this week. You can catch up on any episodes you may have missed by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca, and you can find all those podcasts at aptnnews.ca/face-to-face podcast. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night. We'll see you back here next week.